Welcome back to the deep dive. You know, usually when we sit down to crack open a topic, we're looking at something. Well, something sensible.
Right. Grounded.
Grounded, exactly. A new tech white paper, a historical biography, maybe a study on, I don't know, urban planning, something grounded in what we all generally agree is reality.
Grounded is a safe word. We definitely like safe.
We do, but today I feel like we need to put on a hazmat suit and maybe grab a theological safety harness.
That might not be enough.
It might not. We are looking at a stack of documents that, frankly, reads like a supernatural thriller novel, but it's presented with the absolute seriousness of a Supreme Court legal brief.
It is, and I don't think that's an exaggeration. It's one of the most intense, radical, and just conceptually dense pieces of writing we've covered in a long, long time. It really does challenge the very fabric of institutional authority.
Okay, so let's name it. We're talking about a concept called a multiverse journal. Specifically, we're deep diving into index number 2236, and it's written by an author named Stephen Work.
And the date is very specific.
Very specific. The entry is dated February 16th, 2026, with some pretty significant edits added just the next day, on the 17th.
Right.
And right off the bat, before we even get to the first argument, the source material throws just this massive curveball at us. The author claims this text was written under the guidance of the ghost of Pope Thomas I.
Which immediately sets the stage for you, the listener. You have to recalibrate all your expectations right there.
Totally.
We are not just dealing with political commentary here or, standard religious debate. We are entering a world where the spiritual war isn't a metaphor. It's not poetry. For this author, this is a literal legal battle taking place between the living and the dead right within the hierarchy of the Catholic Church.
Pope Thomas I, I have to admit, I don't remember him from history class.
You wouldn't. And that's the point. It's likely a reference to a figure within this specific multiverse he's writing about, or maybe a spiritual claim to the papacy that isn't recognized by our history books. It's a signal. It tells you we are operating in an alternative timeline or some kind of hidden spiritual reality from page 1.
So our mission today is to unpack this specific source. We're going to try and get our heads around the author's argument for something called deprivationism.
A big word.
A very big word. We're also going to look at the status of a group called the Society of Saint Pius X, or the SSPX, and then we have to look at the truly explosive claim that the Vatican has been infiltrated by what the author calls a synagogue of Satan.
And look, before we dive in, we really need to offer our standard disclaimer, but with, I think, extra emphasis today.
For sure.
The content we're about to analyze contains intense, controversial, and highly theological arguments. So it includes some extremely inflammatory language regarding religious groups, specifically about Jewish people and the state of Israel, and also geopolitical entities.
Right.
So our job here is to impartially report on what the source says. We're acting as cartographers. We are just mapping out this person's worldview to understand the internal logic, no matter how jarring that logic might be to a modern listener.
We are not endorsing these viewpoints.
Not at all. We are simply exploring them.
Exactly. We are the explorers of this document. So, with that said, let's start with that core thesis. The big word of the day. Deprivation, or deprivationism. Help us out here. It honestly sounds like a sleep disorder.
Oh, it does, doesn't it?
Yeah,
I'm sorry, I'm suffering from chronic C deprivation.
I can't come to work today.
No, but it is a theological term, and it's one that tries to explain a very specific problem for a certain kind of traditionalist Catholic. To get it, you really have to understand the dilemma that they face.
Okay.
You've probably heard of sedevacantism.
Yeah, that's the idea that the chair of Peter is empty, right? Sed vacante.
Yeah.
That there is no pope.
Correct. Sede means seat, vacante means empty. The seat is empty. Now, the problem with just saying there is no pope is that it creates this massive legal and structural black hole in the church.
A black hole.
A huge one. I mean, think about it. If there's no pope, who appoints the cardinals? Who appoints the bishops? The whole line of succession, the apostolic succession, it just stops. If the chair is empty for 70 years, the visible structure of the church effectively vanishes. It dissolves.
So it's a theological dead end. You can't rebuild the institution if the institution has ceased to exist.
It's an apocalyptic dead end, and that's where deprivationism comes in. It's a nuance, a kind of middle ground, if you can call it that.
A way out of the black hole.
Exactly. And the source defines it very clearly. It describes a situation where a pope is, and I'm quoting, legitimately elected, yet deprived of the full form and authority of the papal office.
Okay, let's unpack that. Legitimately elected yet deprived of authority. That sounds like a landlord who owns the building, but he's lost the keys to the front door.
That is actually a pretty good analogy. Or think of it like this. A president-elect who has won the election. The ballots are counted, the procedure was followed, he is the president-elect. But he then refuses to take the oath of office.
Ah, okay.
He's in the White House, he's wearing the suit, people call him Mr. President, but he hasn't formally accepted the duty. He hasn't completed the final step that actually grants him the authority of the office.
So what's the equivalent of the oath of office for a pope in this view?
The author argues that this deprivation happens because of a defect of intention or public heresy.
Defect of intention. So the man in the white cassock, the pope, he went through the motions of the election, the whole machinery of the church, the conclave, it all worked. But inside his head, or maybe in his public actions, he didn't actually intend to do the job of a pope.
That's the argument, precisely. And what is the job of a pope, according to this source? It is not to innovate. It is not to be popular or to adapt to the times. It is to safeguard the tradition. Full stop. To pass on what was received completely unchanged.
Like a curator in a museum.
A perfect analogy. A curator doesn't paint over the Mona Lisa to make it more modern. He protects it. So the argument here is that the modern popes accepted the office with the intention of changing the church, of painting over the masterpiece, not guarding it.
And because of that defect, what happens?
Because of that defect of intention, God blocks the download.
He lost the download.
The spiritual download, the authority, the full form of the office. The source is very specific about this. It poses something called a dubium, which is a formal doubt or a question in Catholic theology, asking whether a Roman pontiff who promote modernism is in this state of deprivation.
And the author's answer is?
A resounding yes, unambiguous.
So he has the office but not the power.
He has the material but not the form. He has the administrative shell but not the spiritual power. He can sign checks, he can meet with ambassadors, he can live in the Vatican, but, and this is the crucial part, he cannot bind the conscience of the faithful, because he lacks the divine assistance of the Holy Ghost that a true pope would have.
And the source is claiming this isn't just a recent problem with Pope Francis. This applies to the papacy all the way back to 1958.
Yes, 1958 is the ground zero in this text. That was the year Pope Pius XII died. For this author, and for many traditionalists, he's seen as the last prince of the church, the last man who really held the line against the modern world.
The last true curator.
Right. So the author's argument is that everything that happened after that election in 1958 is suspect.
I noticed the text does something very specific, and you can tell it's deliberate when referring to the current Pope, Francis. It refers to him as Pope Bergoglio, and it's always a lowercase p.
It is a deliberate and I'd say aggressive stylistic choice. It's an attack on the page. By using the lowercase p, the author is visually demoting him. He's saying, you are not a title, you are not the office, you are just a man.
And using his birth name, Bergoglio, instead of his chosen papal name, Francis.
It's the same move. It's stripping him of his spiritual identity. It's like calling a king by his first name, just walking up and saying, hey, Chuck. It's an act of rebellion.
And the text explains why. It explicitly states this is meant to indicate he is deprived of spiritual resources.
Yes, and there's a line in there that is actually quite chilling when you stop and think about it.
I think I know the one you mean. It says he's left only with the basic graces to continue breathing and potentially repent.
Exactly. Just think about that image. It paints a picture of a man who is spiritually hollowed out, a walking shell. The author is suggesting that because of this state of deprivation, the Holy Ghost does not provide the guidance, the protection from error that a true pope would receive. He is, in the eyes of this author, a man operating under a curse, running a divine machinery that he doesn't spiritually possess.
So he's just running on biological autopilot.
Running on biological autopilot, sustained by God's basic grace only so he has a chance to say, I'm sorry, before he dies. It's a terrifying concept.
It really emphasizes this distinction the author is making between the legal, physical structure of the church and the mystical reality of the church.
Yes.
You can have the buildings, the bank accounts, the Swiss Guard, the whole apparatus, but if you don't have the spirit, you're just a shell corporation.
A hollow corporation. Mm-hmm. And that distinction, that idea, is the foundation for absolutely everything else in this document. Because if you accept that premise, that the person at the top is deprived of authority, then you immediately have to ask, who is running the show?
Right. If the captain is spiritually asleep, or worse, if the captain is a mutineer.
Who is steering the ship?
And that takes us to the next layer of this deep dive, the timeline of infiltration. As you said, the source is obsessed with the year 1958. Why that year specifically?
Well, as we touched on, 1958 was the death of Pius XII. The argument in the text is that just before his death, the College of Cardinals, that's the group of men who elect the next pope, had already been infiltrated.
And the phrase the author uses is?
Synagogue of Satan Modernists.
That is a very heavy phrase, Synagogue of Satan.
It is biblical language. It's taken directly from the book of Revelation or the Apocalypse, chapters 2 and 3. But here it's being weaponized against a specific group within the church hierarchy itself.
So what does it mean in this context?
It implies a group that claims to be of the faith, that looks like they belong, but is actually working for the adversary. The claim is that through fraud, injustice, and disordering, these infiltrators compromised the 1958 election that chose John III, the Pope, who would go on to call the Second Vatican Council.
So the argument is that the bad guys got in, they rigged the system, and every pope since 1958 has been part of this imposter church.
Yes, that's the exact term used. And it gets even more graphic. The source describes the post-1958 institution not as the Catholic Church, but as a synagogue of Satan's soul-murdering spider.
Wow. A soul-murdering spider. That is vivid. It's not just a bad church or a mistaken church. It's a predator.
Yeah, it's designed to be terrifying. And the metaphor is very specific. A spider spins a web of false truths. But what makes this web so dangerous, according to the source, isn't that it looks evil.
It's that it looks good.
Exactly. It looks inviting, it shimmers in the light, it looks like a safe place to land.
Right. I have the list here from the text of the disguises the spider uses, and they're really something. Let's go through them. First on the list, compassion.
This is where the source completely turns traditional modern virtues on their head. To the modern ear, compassion sounds like an absolute good. How can compassion be bad?
And interreligious ecumenism, bringing different religions together for dialogue, that sounds positive.
It does. And then the assertion that hell or demons don't exist? To a secular person, that just sounds reasonable. But the author frames every single one of these as a lure, as bait in the spider's web.
There's a specific phrase used, sins conforming disguised as compassion.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Let's break down the logic of that because it's key to the whole worldview. Let's say I see you doing something that my religion teaches will lead to your eternal damnation.
Okay.
The modern compassionate response is to say, it's okay. God loves you just as you are. Keep doing what makes you happy. I am being compassionate in the modern sense. I'm affirming you. I'm making you feel good.
Right.
But in the author's view, I am conforming to your sin. I am validating the very thing that he believes will destroy your soul. I am an accomplice to your spiritual suicide.
So real compassion in this very specific worldview would be telling the hard truth, even if it hurts, even if it makes me look like a bigot.
Exactly. The false versi of the spider creates a comfortable, easy, pleasant path to damnation. If you tell someone hell doesn't exist, they stop worrying about the state of their soul.
Great.
They stop repenting. They stop trying to change. And then, according to the author, the spider gets them.
It's like a spiritual bait and switch. You think you're getting love and acceptance, but you're actually getting something the source calls intellect darkening.
Intellect darkening is a very important concept here. The idea is that these modern teachings, these false truths, they don't just mislead you, they actually damage your ability to perceive reality. They damage your intellect, so you can no longer distinguish between good and evil, between the sacred and the profane.
It's a form of spiritual brain damage.
That's a good way to put it. You become unable to see the web you're trapped in.
The source also mentions the idea that unbaptized non-Catholics have other paths to God.
Which is a standard idea in modern ecumenism, that God's grace can work through other religions too. But for this author, who is rooting himself in a very strict pre-1958 theology, specifically the doctrine of extra ecclesiam nulla salus, outside the church there's no salvation. That is a damnable heresy.
To him, that's the spider whispering in your ear that you don't need the church to be saved.
Correct. And if you don't need the church, you don't need the sacraments. And if you don't need the sacraments, which he sees as the channels of grace,
We're defenseless against the spider.
you are walking naked into a spiritual battlefield, utterly defenseless.
This brings us then to the heroes of the author's story, or at the very least, the resistance fighters.
The resistance, yes.
The Society of Saint Pius X, the SSPX.
This is the practical application of the author's entire theology. If the Vatican is the spider's lair, The SSPX are the ones trying to cut through the web.
Can you give us a little background on them for those who might not know?
Sure. So the SSPX was founded by a French Archbishop, Marcel Lefebvre, back in 1970. He and his followers fundamentally rejected the changes that came out of the Second Vatican Council.
Especially the changes to the Mass.
Especially the changes to the Mass. They kept the old Latin Mass, they kept the old catechism, the old theology, and for decades now, they have been in this very complicated legal and canonical dance with Rome. Sometimes they're declared excommunicated, sometimes that's lifted, sometimes they're tolerated, but they're always on the outside looking in.
The source talks about a state of emergency.
This is their core legal and theological justification. It's a real concept in church law, in canon law. If there's a dire emergency like a massive crisis where souls are at risk, the normal rules of obedience can be suspended.
Give me an analogy.
Think of a fire. If a building is on fire and there's a child trapped inside, you don't need to wait for the owner's permission to break a window to save the child. The emergency gives you jurisdiction.
And the author argues that the imposter church has created a permanent spiritual state of emergency. The house is always burning.
The house has been on fire since 1958. Correct. So when the SSPX consecrates bishops without the Pope's permission, or when they hear confessions without formal faculties from the local bishop, they aren't actually being disobedient. Not in the eyes of the author. He reframes it completely.
He says they appear disobedient only to those trapped in the web.
Right. And it's a powerful argument from his perspective. If you are standing inside the burning building, but you don't see the fire, perhaps because your intellect has been darkened, then the fireman breaking the window with an axe looks like a dangerous vandal.
But if you can see the fire, you know he's a hero.
You know he's a hero. The author claims the SSPX maintains rigid fidelity to the traditional pre-1958 Catholic Church.
Rigid fidelity. It's interesting because usually calling someone rigid is an insult. It means inflexible. But here, it's the highest possible compliment.
In a world of fluid truth and moral relativism, rigidity is the only thing that keeps you standing upright. It's a virtue.
And what is their main weapon in this fight against the spider?
It's the traditional Latin Mass, the traditional Latin rite, as the source calls it. It's described as a spiritual weapon.
I found this part fascinating. The author isn't just saying, oh, I prefer the Latin Mass because it's prettier or it sounds more reverent. That's an aesthetic argument. He's making a metaphysical one.
He is. He's saying it has actual objective power against demonic forces.
A weapon against the intellect-darkening, soul-murdering spider.
Yes. The argument, which you find in a lot of traditionalist writing, is that the old rituals, the specific Latin formulas, the gestures, the prayers, they were designed and perfected over centuries to be a shield, to hold back the darkness. They are, by their very nature, exorcistic.
So when the Vatican changed the Mass after Vatican II,
they essentially disarmed the faithful. They took away their primary weapon. They swapped a spiritual sword for a spoon.
The source quotes a principle here that I thought was very potent. What was once sacred can never become profane.
That is actually a paraphrase of a statement by Pope Benedict XVI, funnily enough, in reference to the Old Mass. But the author here uses it as a club to attack Pope Francis's recent and very strict restrictions on the Latin Mass.
So the logic is, if this Mass is truly sacred, it can't be made harmful or illegal.
Exactly. The author argues that if the Vatican is now trying to ban the thing that is most holy, the most powerful spiritual weapon they have, that action itself is absolute proof of the Vatican's demonic direction.
It's a self-reinforcing logic.
Completely. Why would the true church ban its own most sacred heritage? The author's answer is simple, because it's not the true church anymore. It's the spider, and the spider is terrified of the sword.
Okay, so we have the spider in Rome. We have the resistance, the SSPX, fighting from the outside. But this leads to a massive theological puzzle. If the Pope is deprived of his authority, where is the authority? Where is the chair?
This is, for me, one of the most provocative parts of the entire document. Because the chair of Peter isn't just a piece of furniture in the Vatican.
Right, it's a concept.
It's the seat of authority. It's the jurisdiction. It's the power to bind and to loose. And the source argues that because the papal office holders since 1958 have forsaken the chair, because they have a defect of intention, the chair has effectively moved.
It's migrated, like a spirit jumping from one body to another.
That's one way to think of it. The author proposes, quite explicitly, that the chair, the true spiritual authority of the papacy, now rests with the SSPX.
That is a huge claim. That is essentially saying we are the real Vatican now.
It is an enormous claim. It implies that the entire visible structure of the church, the buildings, the Vatican City State, the hierarchy, the diocese, the embassies, is empty. It's a husk, a shell company.
Yeah.
And the invisible reality of the church, the true authority to teach and govern and sanctify, has decamped to a small, marginalized splinter group.
And the author believes he has proof of this. A specific piece of evidence for this migration of authority is something that happened in 2020. He calls it the Pontifical Yearbook Incident.
Right.
And I have to be honest, before reading the source, I did not know the Pontifical Yearbook was a thing, let alone that it could be a source of major controversy.
Well, welcome to the deep dive within the deep dive.
Yeah.
The Annuario Pontificio, the Pontifical Yearbook, is the official annual directory of the Holy See. It's mostly a very boring book of lists. It lists every diocese, every bishop, and crucially, all the official titles of the Pope. Vicar of Christ, successor of the Prince of the Apostles, Supreme Pontiff of the Universal Church, Primate of Italy, and so on. Historically, for centuries, these titles are listed right there under the Pope's name in big, bold letters. They define who he is, what his office is.
But in the 2020 edition, something changed.
Something changed, yes. And the source includes a whole appendix detailing this. In the 2020 edition, under Pope Francis's name, Jorge Mario Bergoglio, those titles, Vicar of Christ, etc., were moved.
Moved where?
They were no longer at the top of the page defining him. They were placed at the bottom under a thin line and labeled as historical titles.
Historical titles, as in things you used to be called, like putting former Prince of Wales in the King's letterhead, things that are just quaint traditions from the past.
That is certainly how the critics, including the author of our source, interpreted it. And the text quotes Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano extensively on this point.
Vigano is a very controversial figure himself. A former Vatican ambassador to the U.S. who has become one of the most fierce, outspoken critics of Pope Francis.
And Vigano, he didn't mince words about this change. The source quotes him saying this was an official alteration of the papacy. He argues that by moving Vicar of Christ to a footnote of historical titles, Francis was essentially admitting he doesn't see himself as the vicar, the representative of Christ, but as the master of the church.
Vigano uses the word tyrant.
He does. He says Francis views himself as master of the church rather than its guardian. And that's a key distinction. A guardian protects what he received. A master changes it to suit his own will.
And then he goes even further with a biblical comparison.
A very pointed one. He compares it to Judas at the Last Supper.
Is it I, Master?
That's the quote. The scene where Jesus predicts his betrayal and Judas the betrayer asks, "Is it I?" Vigano suggests that this act of demoting the title Vicar of Christ is a form of betrayal, a disavowal. He's saying Francis is essentially asking, is it I who is betraying the office of Vicar of Christ? And the answer is yes.
So the source takes this incident, which to an outsider looks like a simple layout change in a directory, and treats it as the smoking gun, the confession.
For this author, this was the moment of cleaving.
The cleaving, that sounds painful, like a great amputation.
That's the imagery, yes. The author argues that when that title Vicar of Christ was officially dropped as his primary identifier, the snake church, another one of his terms, was fully and finally severed from the Holy Church.
So before that, maybe there was some ambiguity. Maybe Pope Bergoglio was just a bad pope in a state of deprivation. But after disavowing the title itself...
The connection was, and I'm quoting again, finalized ripping away.
So, in the author's timeline, 2020 was the final nail in the coffin. The Vatican as an institution became a false witness. It calls itself Catholic, it looks Catholic, but it's just a skin suit. The soul has left the body.
And to back this up, to give it more weight, the source again references one of the greatest minds in church history, St. Thomas Aquinas, specifically his writings on tyrants in a work called De Regno.
Aquinas is the heavy artillery of Catholic theology. You can't just dismiss an argument if it's grounded in Aquinas.
Exactly. By invoking Aquinas, the author's trying to say, look, this isn't just my opinion. This isn't some fringe idea. This is grounded in the deepest traditions of the faith. And Aquinas has a very clear theology of tyranny.
What does he say?
He argues that if a ruler acts against the common good and against the divine law, he ceases to be a legitimate ruler and becomes a tyrant. And crucially, a tyrant lacks legitimacy. You do not owe obedience to a tyrant. In fact, you might even have a duty to disobey him.
So by labeling the modern papacy as tyrannical and backing it with Aquinas, he's providing a formal justification for complete disobedience.
He's building a complete legal and theological case for it.
Okay, so we've covered the church, we've covered the schism, we have a deprived pope, a resistance movement, and a migrated chair authority. But the source it doesn't stop there. It zooms out
Way out.
from the Vatican to the United Nations and the Middle East.
And this is where we have to be extremely precise and careful in our reporting, because the source shifts from what is, an internal theological argument to a very dark, all-encompassing geopolitical worldview. It enters the realm of what some people would definitely call conspiracy theory, but for the author, it is simply theology applied to global politics.
The author starts talking about demons with nationhood.
Yes, the underlying concept here is corporate personhood. In our legal system, a corporation is a person. It can own property, sign contracts, sue, and be sued.
Right. It's a legal fiction.
It's a legal fiction that has real-world power. The author takes this literal legal concept and applies it to the supernatural. He argues that our legal systems can be used to create a physical, legal presence for what he calls forms from hell.
So a corporation, or a nation-state, can be a vessel for a demon, in the same way a human body can be possessed.
Satanic dragons of resources. That's the exact phrase he uses. The author argues that these legal structures, these corporate persons, allow demonic entities to operate on the world stage with nationhood rights. If a demon has a corporate charter or a seat at the UN, it has rights. It has legal protection. It has an army.
And the specific primary example given in the text is the modern state of Israel?
It is. And we must state again, the language here is extremely inflammatory and deeply disturbing. The source claims that the UN's recognition of the State of Israel in 1948 gave nationhood rights to a demonic form.
I'm looking at the text right here, and it refers to, well, I'm just going to read the quote directly. Satan's anus that erupted in blood, commanded by the damned ghost of Herod.
It is visceral, violent, shocking imagery. The author is linking the modern state of Israel not to the biblical promise of the land to Abraham, but to a demonic resurrection of King Herod, the king from the New Testament who ordered the massacre of the innocents to try and kill the baby Jesus.
So he sees the modern state as a continuation of that same Herodian spirit, an anti-Christian entity at its core.
Yes, an antichrist entity that has been given legitimacy, power, and protection by the nations of the world.
And the timeline, of course, connects back to the Vatican once again.
It does. The source points to the year 1993. That was the year the Vatican, under Pope John Paul II, officially recognized the State of Israel and established full diplomatic relations. For the author of this text, this was the moment of fully solidifying hell on earth.
Let's just track that timeline. So 1958 was the infiltration. The spider gets inside the Vatican.
Right.
1993 was the solidification of hell on earth, when the spider-controlled Vatican shakes hands with what he calls the dragon.
The formal alliance.
And 2020 was the final cleaving of the church, the public divorce from Christ's authority.
Exactly. It's a comprehensive step-by-step history of spiritual decline and demonic consolidation of power on earth. And this leads the author to ask a question.
What level of hell are we in?
It is a genuinely terrifying question to ask. He's not being poetic.
Yeah.
He's arguing that we are now living in a world where personalhood demons, as he puts it, have nationhood powers. They have armies, they have economies, they have diplomatic immunity. And the one supernatural force that was supposed to hold them back, the Catholic Church, has been taken over by their ally, the spider.
It's a bleak picture. It's suffocating. There's no way out.
It is. But remember, for the author, there is a way out. There is hope. The chair, the authority, it hasn't been destroyed. It's just moved.
To the SSPX.
To the faithful remnant. To those who see and resist the spider.
So let's take a breath here for a second. We've unpacked the source. We've looked at the theology of seed deprivation, the conspiracy of infiltration, the geopolitics of demons. What does this all mean when you put it together? What are we looking at here?
I think it's a profound study in absolute conviction. The author of this text, stevenwork, has constructed a completely self-consistent reality. It has its own logic. If you accept his initial premises, that the pre-1958 church was perfect, that Vatican II is a demonic council, that legal forms can be vessels for demons, then everything else follows quite logically from that.
It's not crazy in the sense of being random or incoherent.
Not at all. It's highly structured. It's a multiverse logic, as the journal's title suggests.
It really is like a multiverse. He's living in a different universe than the average person walking down the street. When he looks at the Pope giving a blessing, he sees a squatter in a holy place. When he sees the UN General Assembly, he sees a boardroom of dragons.
It's a universe of incredibly high stakes. Every liturgical change, every diplomatic treaty, every papal statement is a battle in a cosmic war. There are no accidents. There are no coincidences. There is no neutrality.
And it really forces us to think about the concept of cognitive dissonance, doesn't it? I mean, how does a believer navigate a world where they believe their own leaders have been replaced by imposters?
They create a narrative of exile. That's how. They see themselves as the remnant. They are the faithful few holding the line while the rest of the world has fallen to the enemy. It gives a profound meaning to their suffering and their marginalization.
It validates any persecution they might feel. If the mainstream church ignores you or even punishes you, it's not because you're wrong.
It's because you're a threat to the spider. It proves you're right.
It turns that marginalization into a form of martyrdom. They hate me because I know the truth.
Exactly. It's a very powerful psychological mechanism.
But there's a final provocative thought that really lingers for me after reading all of this. The source keeps asking where the chair is. And it argues that this divine authority can detach from the office. It can leave the physical Vatican and move to a group like the SSPX.
It does. And in doing so, it raises a very dangerous question.
If the chair can move once, can it move again?
Precisely. If tomorrow the leaders of the SSPX decide to, say, make some kind of deal with the Spider Church in Rome, a deal that a follower deems a compromise,
Could the chair then move away from them? Could it move to an even smaller, more rigid group? Could it move to an individual?
could it move to you? Once you disconnect authority from the visible, stable institution, you open the door to endless fragmentation. Every person can effectively become their own pope, deciding for themselves where the true church resides based on their own private interpretation of tradition.
And that is a fascinating, maybe tragic paradox. In the desperate search for absolute, unchanging authority, you might end up with absolute anarchy.
Indeed, it's the inherent risk of the Multiverse Journal. When you write your own reality, you might find you have to live in it alone.
Well, on that note, we're going to leave you to mull that over. Check your own spiritual sources. Keep your eyes open for spiders, metaphorical or otherwise, and we will see you on the next deep dive.